Hello everyone, I'm Tanner Linkus, and today I'm going to be doing a post-colonial analysis of Bless Me Ultima by Rodolfo Anaya. So let's first talk about post-colonial criticism from our Berry text. Post-colonial criticism emerged as a distinct category only in the 1990s. So while post-colonial literature certainly existed before, it was only recognized as a form of critique in the 90s. It opposes universalism, which is a liberal humanist idea. An example could be saying that Edgar Allan Poe's poems say something about the dark side of human nature, while postcolonialism would reject that and say that there's no single human nature to be observed in literature. And so that's kind of a say-nothing statement. Postcolonialism focuses on a culture during and or after colonization. I think there has to be colonizers in order for there to be a post-colonial work. And a popular critic on post-colonial criticism, Baba, from our Bedford text, Baba examined how colonized people have co-opted and transformed various elements of the colonizing culture, a process he referred to as hybrid. So we're going to talk a lot about hybridity in today's presentation, because in the novel Bless Me Ultima we see borderland culture, which is where two distinct cultures meet. They're different, but they meet in this one area and they become this hybrid culture. And so that's what we're going to talk about, and that's what is talked about in Bless Me Ultima. So now let's talk about the author, Rodolfo Anaya. He was born on October 30th, 1937 in Pasteur, New Mexico. One thing that I thought was interesting is how I finally get to talk about someone who's still alive and has written a great book, which is something you don't normally get to do in English. He was awarded the National Humanities Medal by Obama in 2015 and won the American Book Award for Bless Me Ultima, which is his best-known novel and what he is known for. And he uses magical realism to display themes of post-colonization. So if you remember my previous presentation on magical realism, that should be helpful in an understanding of Bless Me Ultima. We see great things like a giant golden carp, and there's not really a big reaction to it. It's beautiful, but it's not really seen as something that shouldn't be there. It's accepted. So that's kind of where the magical realism comes in. Alright, so let's talk about the two main characters in the story, Ultima and her grandson Antonio. Antonio is the protagonist. But let's talk first about Ultima. Ultima is Antonio's grandmother who embodies native beliefs. So she is a curandera, which doesn't have an English translation, but roughly means healer woman. She is a traditional Chicano healing woman. And so she uses herbs and natural cures. And she has pagan, and I put that in quotation marks, pagan beliefs. But she also accepts Christianity. So here's our first example of a kind of borderland culture. Ultima believes in a one true God, but also believes in pagan gods. So this might be confusing. Antonio certainly thinks so. So let's go on to Antonio. He is a conflicted youth who learns to traverse a frontier where Christianity and native beliefs intermingle. And although he ultimately fails to decide between the two beliefs, and that's what he's trying to do throughout this entire story, is decide, which is true, which will I accept. He learns the most important lesson of all, which is how to have sympathy for other people and accept them and their beliefs rather than try to foist your own beliefs on them. Like perhaps a colonizer would do. So let's talk about La Frontera, or the borderland. From Abadi Naji, borders are crossed not only by Antonio, but by members of his family too, for example, in terms of growth and development. Now, I think these borders are important in a post-colonial analysis because they show this intermingling of two cultures, whereas the American settlers were the colonizers, or the European settlers were colonizers. The natives were, of course, the colonized. And so now we have this mix of two different cultures, and that is Chicano. But let's talk about how the different family members live also on a border. So in the novel, we see World War II and the atomic age versus agrarian and isolated life. The brothers of Antonio go off to war, and when they return, they see the world differently. This has obviously changed who they are, and this shows the effect of a colonizing force. Even though they went to war, it does show a very similar effect to colonization, where they were just used to farming and living a peaceful life. They were sent off to war, and now they've returned. They are restless, and they can't really stay at home. Antonio lives on the border between Ultima's native belief system and his mother's Catholic faith. So here we see Antonio's borderland, but also his mother's. She too lives with Ultima, and she coexists with Ultima's beliefs, perhaps even has sympathy, as Ultima certainly has for Antonio's mother. Other borderlands we see that are perhaps more universal are the border between love and hate, life and death, revenge and forgiveness, single belief, and a mix of beliefs. And then we also see in the family names and family occupations, Antonio is a Luna and a Vicero. A Luna is the family name of his mother, and they're farmers in the Llano River Valley. But his father is a vaquero, or cowboy. So while his mother is used to a stable home, his father is used to roaming the wilds. And we see his father throughout the book struggle to accept his new solitary life. Or not solitary, but, he's not out adventuring the wilds anymore. So, Bless Me Ultima has been the subject of some controversy because it's said to sympathize with colonizers. This is something that you don't really see in a lot of post-colonial texts, but Rudolfo Anaya, growing up in Chicano culture, kind of sees how, while it's retained some of its original identity, the native culture, it coexists with this new culture that was foisted upon the native people by Christians. And instead of being angry about this, he has found forgiveness and sympathy for others, and that's what he writes about in this book. And we see this in Ultima as she advocates for a worldview of forgiveness, even to one's worst enemies. This is something that Antonio struggles with. When somebody does something to him that's wrong, he really struggles to forgive. At one point in the book, one of his friends is killed by the antagonist of the novel, Cisco, and Ultima is eventually even killed because she is seen as a witch, and she isn't accepted because she's not a Christian. She also holds pagan beliefs, and people believe that she is a witch. And it's kept ambiguous whether or not this is true. There's a test that's done, but it comes back neutral. She's neither nor. So I thought that was really interesting. From Holton, Christianity and curanderismo are not in conflict. Rather, they are skew. And curanderismo is a metaphor for something Christianity has lost. So in the book, we see Antonio at his catechism, which is Catholic rites, and he is bored out of his mind. He doesn't like it. He feels obliged to be there because he feels like he's a Christian, and that if he doesn't believe, then he will go to hell. But then we see these scenes, like with the golden carp. There's another scene where he goes into a neighbor's garden, and this neighbor, it gets drunk and plants by the light of the moon, and his garden is better than anyone else's, and it's said that he uses magic. And Antonio gets a lot more out of these pagan, in quotations, encounters than he does at church. And so it kind of shows how Christianity has lost its power to inspire, whereas Antonio's native beliefs truly inspire him, even though he still holds on to his Christian values. Ultima acts as an awakener and the bridge between the worlds of the colonizers and the colonized. As a native folk healer herself, Ultima sees this divide in Antonio and in the culture. And she acts as a unifying force, trying to bring the two together, because it's not like they can be separate at this point. They've been successfully colonized, and there are many Christians and many native believers, so they have to find some kind of middle ground. And that's what we see fought over in this book, is the native ground of the culture and also of Antonio's soul. And in the end, he asks Ultima, bless me, Ultima, because the way forward is not easy for him. But Ultima, of course, gives him her blessing, and we're left with the message that the best thing you can have in this world is sympathy for others, and that's really the main message, is that colonized, colonizer, what you need to be able to do is to forgive and move forward, whatever that means. That's all I had for today. Thank you.